All right, well, should we get started?
Yeah.
Sure.
So thank you and welcome. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our speakers for being here and making this conversation possible. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kavita Daya. I'm the director of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program. My faculty position is in the English department, so I'm also associate professor of English. And I'm really excited to be having the second panel discussion as part of our Alumni Speaker Series. So before we get started and before I tell you a little bit about how this speaker series emerged, I want to thank on behalf of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, my colleague Shirley Graham for co-sponsoring this event and making it possible. Um, Also, I do want to thank Jennifer Manere and I want to thank Nicole Smith, who isn't here, but the two of them have been absolutely critical to putting together all of the different moving parts of today's event, so I appreciate their support. And I also want to thank Denise Saint, our CCAS team. They have been absolutely wonderful in terms of helping us create the publicity materials, disseminate the idea. William is here to photograph the event, and so I really appreciate that team. And then finally, I do want to thank Dean Paul Walbeck and the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences for funding the series and making this possible. We launched this Alumni Speaker Series last year, and the first event was in September 2018. Our goal in terms of the speaker series was complicated and not so complicated. So firstly, we want to brag about our alums. So this is a great way for us to do that. We want to showcase and celebrate the many diverse and wonderful paths and accomplishments that our alums have taken after graduating from the program, right? As they've been imagining change, they've been enacting and creating change in the different communities and institutions that they represent. And we also want to use these speaker series, these panel discussions, as ways to build out our community, to connect current students with those who have gone before them, to provide networking opportunities so that they can envision the many possibilities that a degree in WGSS represents. We are also, I want to acknowledge, poised at a unique historical moment. For women's rights, gender and sexuality in terms of thinking about rights and displacement here in the United States, but also internationally, it is urgent now, much, for me, much more than ever, that we create new dialogues and that we, in the many circles that we represent, we talk about, we envision, and we create change in the institutions and communities we are a part of. So it's a special honor and pleasure for me to welcome three very illustrious alumni back to GW and back to our program. They have dramatically and I think very vividly made an impact in the different spaces that they've worked in and contributed to in terms of gender, sexuality, and social justice. So my wonderful colleague and associate director Cindy Deitch will say a few words and introduce the speaker, and I look forward to this dynamic conversation. So thank you for being here.
So I will be brief and just, I'll introduce each speaker, and we'll just go in the direction they're on sitting at the table. So Kate Black, who was, it took me a little while to figure this out, but was Kate Loffelman.
There you go.
I got married.
When she was here.
I made it easier on everybody.
And she, I think, started working at Emily's List when you were still in the program, or shortly after that. And for many years was at Emily's List in a variety of different positions. And she was like our person at Emily's List who helped train and mentor a number of our students over the years who interned there. And that was a great resource, as I hope others of you will be after you graduate. And currently she works for the FCC Commission and is like a deputy or chief of staff.
Policy advisor.
Policy advisor for one of the commissioners. And so we actually have two people on the panel who are working for the federal government under the Trump administration, and I hope they'll talk about that because I think lots of people think like there's no possibilities of doing anything. And so this will be like really interesting for all of us to hear. And well, then turn it over to Kate to tell us more about that.
Well, thank you, Cindy, and thank you for having me. So my name is Kate Black. I am originally from Columbus, Ohio. I graduated from Miami University in 2012. That feels a long time ago. And I felt, kind of thinking about what was next for me. I thought about law school. I took the LSATs and realized very quickly, not for me. And I was really thinking about, how can I affect change? And I knew I wanted to work with women. I knew I wanted to work on campaigns, but I really wasn't sure what that intersection was. And I literally Googled, I think, women in politics, and Emily's List came up. And I took an unpaid internship, moved to DC, and that really got my start here in DC and here in politics. So I came to DC to start my internship at Emily's List, and then soon after got a job on the first Hillary Clinton campaign. So I started in January of 2000, what year was that? What was 2008? Seven? Jeez. Yeah. So I worked on the Clinton campaign, and I started grad school at the same time, which was
probably also graduated in 2002, not 2012.
2000. Yes, you're right. Sorry, it's been a day.
Just to
Thank you. So I started grad school while working on a presidential campaign, which probably most people would not advise you to do. But I was lucky enough that I worked here at the national headquarters, which at the time was in Boston, Virginia, so right on the metro. And the program here was really flexible. Classes started later. I could, get my work done, but also work on the campaign at the same time, which was really valuable to me to be able to work for a woman who was running for president, at the same time come to class and engage with my peers about kind of the broader gender issues at stake, which was really exciting. After the Clinton campaign, I worked at a variety of Democratic hotspots. I went back to Emily's List. I worked at the DNC, where I helped usher in the nominations for Justice Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. I worked at SEIU, the largest labor union, for nurses and staff, and then had the opportunity to go back to Emily's List, where I worked for 7 years, ending as Chief of Staff and Vice President of Research. And in that role, I really had an opportunity to work hand in hand with candidates in their campaigns, helping them everything with, policy decisions to opposition research to figuring out how, something in their past might affect their futures. Emily's List is a great example, I think, of when women can come together and affect change. If people don't know the story of Emily's List, I'm happy to tell it. But in effect, it was women who came together in 1985 to elect some of the first women to the Senate, and they were successful in electing Barbara Mikulski, who went on to become the longest-serving woman in Congress. We have an intern, a former intern at Emily's List, so I'm sure you could share your experiences too. But after 2016, I think like a lot of people, I kind of reassessed what my plans were for my future and decided to stay at Emily's List and help grow what's called the Run to Win program. After 2016, we saw a huge surge of women coming to Emily's List and saying, Hillary lost, but I want to continue. I want to run. And so Emily's List figured out a way to really harness that energy through this Run to Win program. I think today they're up to 46,000 women who have come to them saying, putting their hand up and saying, I want to run, which is pretty, I don't even know how to describe the sheer power of that. In any normal cycle before 2016, we would have, about 1,000 women coming to us in a 2-year period through these channels, and now we have, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of women. So part of my role was really managing the programs and structures to facilitate that growth. But in October 2017, I was approached to join the federal government and work at the Federal Communications Commission, which, as you alluded to, Cindy, is a move in this climate. And, I really thought long and hard about the choice. The Federal Communications Commission is run by 5 commissioners, and I work for a Democratic woman, actually the only woman at the FCC right now. It was important for me to, especially after 2016 and seeing so many women kind of put their hands up and saying, I want to serve, I want to do, I want to lead. For me, it seemed like this is my opportunity. this is my opportunity to, get in there and do some good. And Andrea and I were talking. I really do credit, I think, the Women's Studies program here with kind of giving me some tools to help navigate, doing gender work in a different space. I had always done gender work in politics. I had elected women up and down the ballot for over 10 years. But now I was taking those same tools but applying them in a different space. I was working, in technology and innovation and media policy. And so part of my work at the FCC is really kind of unpacking and analyzing all the work that needs to be done across those sectors when it comes to women and girls. So that can include everything from STEM education to women portrayed on our TV screens, to women working behind the camera, to women in engineering labs, right? Or to the woman who's building the next great app but can't get the funding. So those are the types of issues that I work on now, and it's a tremendous opportunity to grow my kind of gender skill set. In addition to all of that, I am writing a book, so you can pre-order it now. This is my publisher telling me I should tell you that. It's called Represent, the Woman's Guide for Running for Office and Changing the World. It is a fun how-to guide for anyone, Democrat, Republican, who wants to run for office. I'm writing it with my co-author is actress and comedian June Diane Raphael. She is on Netflix Grace and Frankie right now. She's also in the movie The Long Shot, which is released in May with Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen, where she plays the Secretary of State's kind of right-hand woman. So I hope you guys pick that up. It comes out in September 3rd. And it's a great book for yourself if you're looking to run, a friend that you think should, a teacher that you think should. And I hope you enjoy it. So happy to answer questions and excited to be here.
And I heard you saying you're writing 2 books.
Yeah. Yes. So I am writing a second book. It's not published yet, or I wrote the manuscript. It is basically a political thriller. I grew up on the novels of like Jack Ryan and Tom Clancy. Humphrey Red October was big in my life. And it wasn't until I was adult that I realized that the women characters in those books usually aren't that great. And so about spring of last year, I pitched my agent on a book that centers around a female heroine. She works on a campaign and uncovers a huge plot. And, she's no one's sidekick. She's no one's love interest. She is driving this story herself. And it seemed like the right time to do it. So I finished my manuscript while I was on maternity leave a couple months ago. And, we'll see how it goes. Stay tuned. Coming to an airport near you.
Thank you. And when your first book comes out in the fall, be in touch with us, because maybe we could do some kind of an event.
Oh, that would be
or something.
lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. We are doing a book
Signing,
tour
can I
and a
go see?
signing. We are planning something right now, I think, in middle of September. But I'll keep you guys posted.
Okay, so our next speaker is Andrea Pagano-Reyes. And Andrea's career path is interesting because she started in fundraising before she ever came to GW, which I remember. And she was very persuasive. I don't know if anybody followed her advice, but I remember in all of her classes she gave a plug for why this was a good career for women and why we need more women in it. And I have been like repeating some version of that ever since.
Oh, wow.
Because I think for internships and things like that, a lot of people say, oh, development, that sounds boring. But when you hear Andrea talk, you'll change your mind.
Uh-oh.
And so,
Pressure's on.
And from what I understand, Andrea's continued in this career path, and she's moved around geographically, but I was very excited to learn actually from her father last spring when he visited GW as part of a PhD program site visit.
Yep.
And he showed me pictures and everything, that she was coming back to DC, and we said, oh, we're going to have to get in touch with her. And so she's now working at RAIN, which she will tell you more about. And for those of you who are currently in the program, if I remember this correctly, so Andrea did her major research paper on on women fundraisers, and that she went through the whole IRB process, which and interviewed a bunch of women fundraisers that clearly, and I remember that as an example of how she combined what was her already professional interest with experience in it and her networks and ties and her career plans to a research paper that enhanced both, and that there's a synergy there. And so I think that's a good example for other people to follow too, even though that was now a long time ago in terms of things she's done.
Thank you for that really kind introduction. And yeah, in fact, I was thinking about this, and I have touched on it every once in a while because I think that my paper was terrible. But the concept or the questions, and I've always been one to ask a lot of questions, and I hope everyone around here are also people who ask a lot of questions, was do women fundraisers wield power, and what kind of power do they wield? Because they are behind a lot of these major campaigns, and then they elect, whether male or female, into roles that then create policy that then affect the purse strings, affect major legislation, and so then I was kind of walking it back to like the behind the curtains, what's happening from the fundraising side of things, and that can go from some of the folks that I was interviewing. It was from the both political side as well as the nonprofit world, the direct service side of things, and the kind of impact and hopefully influencing the greater good. But rather than it just being a touchy-feely greater good, I wanted to know about the power side of things because that's important. That's why we're here. So I'll start and say a few things and kind of go through my path. While I have ended up in staying in fundraising. So I am currently the Vice President of Development at RAIN. RAIN stands for Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. And we are the only national sexual assault hotline. And then we obviously are connected to local service providers and resources. And then we also have advocacy and legislative arm and research and other areas that we come into the sexual violence scene. But our core is that kind of direct service piece. I actually started with an internship at National Domestic Violence, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We partnered with NNEDV. And that kind of brought me here, like Emily's List, brought Kate here, where we overlapped at Emily's List. But I also worked at Planned Parenthood, so in the reproductive rights space, from the political side and the fundraising side. And then I was most recently, I left and went to Penn State University and was in advancement development there as well. So I know the drill. And then came back here. I think that a couple of things about fundraising. Everyone always says like, oh, I could never ask people for money, and I'm like, that's not what I do. I get to talk to people who are philanthropists and have means that want to give back, and quite frankly, I meet some of the most amazing people. Generally women. I also, part of Emily's List's founding, which Kate was going to tell you the whole spiel about, was not just about women candidates, it was about women donors. And so that taught me a lot about women donors in particular, even though I've always worked with a broad array of donors, mostly major giving, major donors, but again, I've done a little bit of everything. You kind of have to be a Jane of all trades expert and none in DC, though I do think that this program was something that gave me a bit of an expertise and a bit of an edge that I needed to succeed and be competitive and be able to kind of be very mobile, change and be fluid, and have these little pieces that you could translate your skill set into other things. And I think that you cannot always do that when you don't have that time and that energy that you have spent on yourself and others to hone those research skills, those connection skills, those questioning, theoretical, all of those skills that come along with pursuing a master's. And I would say a couple things to back up. While we talk about our position. You heard Kate say that she was just on maternity leave. I'm also a mother of two. I have an almost 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, 2 girls. So I am a full-time working mother. I have been on maternity leave twice, but I have never gone down to a part-time status. I also nursed through that whole time, and I also have a very traveling job, a job that requires a lot of travel. So it was very challenging, and I felt that having the history and knowing the things that I do in the gender studies world really helped me defend myself, to feel comfortable making the decisions I was making, to not apologize for being a mom, for being a working mom, for nursing, for carrying a pump around on an Amtrak train, for all of those things, and having the very real conversations, and also looking around the room and finding other younger women and them feeling like they could come and talk to me about what does maternity leave do or mean in these different spaces, in very competitive, somewhat cutthroat environments, and kind of how to navigate that. And I find that I continue to do that, and I feel very good about that piece. I like to have that conversation and be very honest. It's not always a pretty conversation, but it's an honest one. So I do want to throw that piece in, and then again to the mobility of what the program allowed for mobility and also flexibility. So I believe when Layla and I were there, you were full-time, correct? So I was part-time. So there's also different ways to do the program, right? And so for me, like what was mentioned, is that I was already in the fundraising world, had dabbled in it, and I kept going back and forth, and for some reason I kept thinking I had to make a decision between politics or policy, and like policy must be like real and politics is like just not, and am I gonna do this fundraising thing, like I just kind of fell into this, do I really? No, I'm gonna be a serious student. So always questioning those things and realizing that, okay, I'm gonna keep going down this path of working because I'm getting this experience, while also taking the time to have these classes and go part-time. So that flexibility did help me and my decisions, and also the flexibility of the program to take a variety of courses. So my undergraduate being in liberal arts, political science, women's studies, I had already had an appreciation for higher education and kind of having a more diverse background and not being like, oh, I'm doing this for a job, because I already had a job, right? It was about exploration, layering, really knowing and having a depth of what we were doing. And so one of the things that I really valued, not to deter quite from this program, is that I got to take some law classes here. And that was really valuable. I was able to, I still think about that way of thinking is a very different way of thinking, and you really have to know how everybody thinks in order to navigate and move and have the conversations that you want to have and get the outcome that you want to have. So I felt like that was incredibly valuable. Probably going over my time. So I am now, is there a time? I don't know. I should have probably done a time check, huh?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to tie through some things, but happy to answer questions and whatnot. But I did return to the area after relocating to central Pennsylvania for 3 years and really enjoying that academic community, and kind of taking a breath and being outside of the Beltway, and getting a different perspective. Deciding whether or not I wanted to run for office, those kinds of things, and decided that, and also at the time my husband had transitioned out of the Marine Corps and went back for his MBA, and also was co-parenting on that whole process, and we said, you know what, the DC is kind of that heartbeat of change, and we need to come back and kind of roll up our sleeves and get working. And so for me, I was also recruited by several organizations in this space, but felt like, especially in this Me Too era, that I couldn't walk away from the sexual violence piece, and really had started out while I was actually in this program, and then as an undergraduate, I had been a full-time domestic violence sexual assault overnight counselor. I had also been a legal advocate, and arguing emergency protection orders and all of that, and that had fueled my passion for what I had seen. but then went down the route of fundraising, and so it kind of all came full circle again. And so I'm back building a team, actually, and that's really great because I get to meet and promote really fabulous women and men that are interested in helping the greater good and combating sexual violence in a number of ways, and making sure we have infrastructure for the long game. And I've gone in and out of the politics and the policy thing and all of that, and I think I will continue to go in and out of that because like this program and like all of my experiences have come together, I realized that nothing is one or the other. It's always probably going to be a little bit of everything. So I will keep doing a little bit of everything, and excited to be here and to be back and see where these paths take you. There is no one path, and it did also bring me to these lovely ladies. So Layla and I were in class together, and that's where we met, and Kate and I were at Emily's List together, and that's where we met. I was doing fundraising for the East Coast at Emily's List at the time, and I tell you what, those women donors, I mean, they could have done anything with their extra funds. They could have bought an extra jet. They could have whatever. But instead, they wanted to see more women run for office. They wanted to see more women take leadership and change policy. And so that was fabulous. And other women, the accomplishments that they'd had, I mean, I'd be in the room with judges and attorneys, and a lot of them were the first in their field, the only in their field. And it's pretty great, but also I think I'm getting pretty tired of having one woman in all of these things. I think that all the raising of the hands, the writing books, the great accomplishments, like we're here, we're not going away, and that's pretty exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So I think we'll continue along the theme of many paths. And also the interconnections and how our students network with each other, both from the program and after the program, because it's not unusual for people to find someone else at some place they're working and then realize they have these paths in common. Okay. So our next and final speaker is Layla Moughari. So Layla currently works, and she will tell us about this, at the GAO, correct, as a policy analyst?
Mm-hmm.
And previous to that, she'll tell us her whole career path, but she worked for a number of times and years at the Institute for Women's Policy Research, starting when she was in the program and was working there as, I think originally as a work studies student.
Yep.
And that one of the things that she worked on then and then was her independent research paper was working with researcher Vicki Lovell on paid sick days. Particularly at a time when DC was just passing it, a number of other places were, and that in addition to the things on the official blurb here, I know that Layla has also always had an interest in international issues and done some work in that area as well that maybe she could address, and along with several of our other alum, has been involved with this organization as a board member called Stop Street Harassment. And I hope maybe you could say something about that as well.
Yes, I will. Thank you. I do have some prepared remarks. I don't, I'm just going to time myself because I don't want to go over. Feel free to stop me if I'm running on. But thank you so much for having me, for inviting me to come to this panel. It's great to be here with such a great group of alum. Certainly so many amazing women, amazing individuals have come through the program, so I'm definitely honored to be here today. I moved to DC 14 years ago to start this program in public policy and women's studies, so it's not so long ago that I was sitting where you are, except they didn't have this building when we were in school. And my program, or my experience in the program, has been super informative for the rest of my life here in DC. It's definitely shaped and informed my life in many, many ways. But before I get into that, I want to talk to you about how I got here. So I grew up in Florida, and 17 years ago I started at the University of Florida. And I started as an engineering major because that's what my parents did. I took chemistry, I took calculus my first semester. Those classes didn't resonate so much with me. I wasn't really excited about it. And then I found interdisciplinary perspectives on women. And that really changed everything. It was a game changer. It turned on its head what I thought about gender and what I thought about roles in society. I learned about matriarchal societies, which means that if the patriarchy isn't the only society to exist, then it can't be the natural order of things. I learned about the male gaze, and then that just changed the way I looked at art, photography, advertisements, film. I read Bell Hooks' Feminism is for Everybody for the first time. So that's my first exposure to really intersectionality and those compounding systems of oppression. I also had to do an internship when I was in undergrad, and I interned at the Florida School of Traditional Midwifery. So I learned all about the birthing industrial complex. And I've been reflecting a lot on that experience now as I think about and consider motherhood. So that was my experience as an undergrad, and I graduated in 2005 from UF, and I was actually I was the first class offered women's studies as a standalone major. And so I walked with two other people at commencement, and that's kind of wild because University of Florida is one of the biggest state institutions in the country. So to walk with just two other people, women's studies was just small back then. It's a different world now. But regardless, and people said, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that major? And my parents were equally concerned about what I was going to do. But regardless, I still wanted to pursue women's studies. It really resonated with me. I loved the classes. I was really excited to find the GW Women's Studies program for those reasons, because it was a combination of women's studies, but then the public policy piece, so it was practical. I could practically apply my passions. So I moved to Foggy Bottom 14 years ago, and as I said, the program really set the stage for my life here. And there are three main things that that have been really important that I took away from the program. One is the network that I had access to, the education, the skills, the knowledge that I learned, and then the third thing is opportunities. So the first thing, the network. So the connections that I made in this program, both professionally and personally, were important, continue to be important. On the professional side of things, I was in school with other people who are passionate about the same things that I'm passionate about. So going down, into the future, these are my colleagues, these are the peers that I work with in this space. And then on a personal level, the friends that I made now, some of those people that I met in the program are still my best friends. So the network is super important. In terms of the education, I learned a lot. I developed a lot of skills. On the public policy side of things, we were actually pretty down on the public policy school when I was in classes, like the economics, the statistics, the public policy analysis. But I will tell you, as a public policy professional in the city, those are really important skills to have. That's the foundation that you need. I'll give you an example. I'm working on economic mobility in the United States now, in my day job. And everyone on my team is a PhD economist, except for me. So having the graduate level background in economics has been really helpful. And then in terms of the women's studies curriculum, I took great classes. I love feminist research methods with Cindy, contemporary feminist theory with Todd Ramlow was fantastic. I love women in the law with Cynthia Harrison. And we read some great theorists like Gayatri Spivak, Pierre Bourdieu, Giorgio Agamben, Judith Butler, Hannah Arendt. The critical theorists were really important for, and I think foundational to my women's studies education, because I learned about epistemology. How do we know what we know to be true? How can we deconstruct systems of oppression? I think I think the critical theory allows you to imagine a new reality or different possibilities. And I think that's really important for public policy as a discipline. And I think it's important for thinking about post-Me Too. How do we imagine a space, a world free from sexual harassment, free from sexual assault? So I think that those critical thinking skills, those analytic skills are maybe the most important thing that I got from women's studies, but certainly they've helped me in my career every step along the way. And then in terms of the opportunities, as Cindy mentioned, through GW, I was able to get this great opportunity to do work study with the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And for those of you who don't know, it's a think tank focused on women's domestic economic security, largely. They do some international work too. It's a think tank founded by Heidi Hartman. She's a Yale-educated labor economist. She's a MacArthur Fellow. I'm sure you've probably studied her in your classes. She's done a lot on the gender wage gap. And they were just developing their paid sick days research, as Cindy mentioned. So I was able to do my independent research project looking at the demographic composition of paid sick leave recipients in the U.S. labor force. And that was a great experience. And I referenced that research project in the interview that I had for the job that I have now. So it was a great experience, great opportunity, and a great relationship that's been hugely important to me that I will come back to because I went back there. So after I graduated from the program, I was job searching, which I don't know if you guys have experienced that yet, but it's hard. It was really hard. It was hard I was applying for jobs, I was interviewing, I was waiting tables, and DC is expensive, so it was just, I needed to start working. So I had a friend who worked in financial services at a real estate finance trade association, and they were hiring an assistant in their public policy shop. So I ended up taking a job with them, even though financial services is not my life's passion. But I learned so much. I learned a lot about the economy. It was right before the economy tanked. I started in the beginning at the end of 2007, and because it was mortgage banking, it was hugely related to the crisis. So they ended up testifying 18 times in 2008. So I learned an incredible amount, and I met some great people that I'm still in touch with. But then I wanted to go back to the gender space, to the gender world. So my network, again, came into play here. And I reached out to IWPR, and I was able to go back to work for them full-time. And that time around, I worked there for 2 years. I worked on some great projects when I was at IWPR, mostly on their flagship program, the Status of Women in the States. I got to work, as part of that, I got to be a project manager on a report looking at the status of women and girls in the DC metro area. And I got to do some international work as well, as Cindy mentioned, and I did love that, and I wanted to pursue that further. So I ended up applying for a job at a small nonprofit supporting women's leadership in Muslim-majority countries, the Women's Learning Partnership. So I didn't get that job through my network, but I did get the job largely because they really liked my research and writing experience and my women's studies background. So I worked there for a year and a half, and this ended up leading to a consulting position for USAID documenting their women's empowerment program. So I co-authored a desktop study for them. And again, what made me competitive for that job is the research and writing skills and the degrees in women's studies. This ultimately led to another opportunity with the National Democratic Institute, led by Madeleine Albright, who's the chair. Because I was documenting USAID's women's empowerment programs, a lot of those programs were national NDI programs. So I knew I was familiar with their interventions and their programs, and that set me up for a position there. But it was not just that. I also had these connections from GW. Susan Markham, I know, who spoke at the the last session, she was just leaving. She worked at Emily's List too, yeah? So she had just, yes, your network is very, very important because it is a small world. So she had come through the program, and I knew her from before, but she had left right before I started, and then someone else who worked on the gender team I went to school with, Caroline. She went to school with Andrea and I. So that connection was also helpful. And I did some great work at the National Democratic Institute. I love my portfolio. There were 6 program areas in my portfolio. One of my projects was doing a qualitative pilot on everyday equality. What does equality mean to rural and urban women and men in Morocco? And we got to pilot that project. So that was among a lot of the work that I did there that I really liked. But I was in my 30s, and I was increasingly interested in quality of life and job security. And I also liked about the U.S. Government Accountability Office. They're known for their research. They're known for their program evaluation. And it was something I had been thinking about for a long time. So I ended up applying to work for them. And they didn't hire me to do gender. But what they did like, and you can't, I think it's hard to get a job in the U.S. government through your networking. I mean, everyone goes in through USA Jobs. But what they did like about my application is the research, the writing, the work at the think tank, my publications that I had worked on. They similar work to what they do. So they thought that was attractive. So that helped me get a job there, and now I'm working in retirement in the Education, Workforce, and Income Security Policy team. And I want to tell you about this community of practice that I helped start there. So gender is not what they hired me for, but I've been able to start this community of practice there that's focused on women's policy issues. GAO has published a lot of research on women's policy issues over the years, but it wasn't recognized as a body of work. It wasn't recognized as this expertise that they had. So I helped, I worked with other people who were interested in women's policy issues, gender policy issues, and we recognized this work. We elevated the issue within the agency, and now there are over 200 members. So I feel really great. I feel like this is a contribution to the federal government at a mid-sized federal agency, and this is among one of my, I'm really proud of this achievement. And I don't think I would have done that had I not had the confidence to start something like that, go into a new organization, identify a need, and then start working towards something. So I had the confidence to do it, and I don't think I would have had that had I not had the education and training from this program, and also the subsequent work along the way. So that's been a really rewarding, fulfilling thing that I've worked on. And then outside of work, as Cindy mentioned, I worked with Holly Curl, who's also a GW alum. She turned her graduate research project, her independent research project on public-based gender harassment into a book, into a movement, into a nonprofit. So I was on her founding board, and I just stepped down after the 6th year. But maybe she'd be someone who could speak to you guys next. She's great. And then I also, for the past 4 years, I've been drumming with an all-ladies Afro-Brazilian percussion band. Batala, Washington. So I definitely feel fortunate to have been able to pursue my passions, like through my career, through my extracurricular activities, and I, for sure, 100%, GW's connections, network, education, all of that has helped. I mean, it's been hard, and at times it wasn't easy, but certainly I've been able to do that through the program. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank Thank you for those eloquent and very, very inspiring remarks. It's really been illuminating. So I think let's maybe spend a few minutes on Q&A. So
Sure.
We'll take questions. Would anyone like to get us started on things
I
that
think
you're
that
thinking
people will
about?
have to leave. If you have a question,
Right.
you can ask it. Right.
Yes,
Hey,
sure.
sure.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you all very much. Very interesting paths you've all been on, and it's wonderful to hear how the research, the work, your education here has inspired, but also very much supported you in very specific ways. I have a question for each of you, but I feel a bit greedy.
Please.
Is that okay?
Yes,
All right,
absolutely.
Okay, so I'll just ask each the questions, and then, whichever way you want to respond. So first of all, Kate, I wanted to ask specifically about your book that is coming out, because this is obviously very exciting, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Very much supporting women running for office. And I suppose I wanted to hear a bit more about some of your tips, particularly around PACs and fundraising.
Sure.
And, bringing that whole
Well,
piece
speaking
in.
next to an expert, you're going to put me on the spot, but we'll do it. We'll do it.
Well, for sure, I'd love to hear
Sure.
more about what your tips are
Yeah.
more broadly,
Mhm.
supporting women to run
Sure.
public office. And then, Andrea, I had a question. I really wanted to ask you, I want to ask you also many questions, but I guess just one I really wanted to ask you about was about, you were mentioning the Me Too era and the work obviously you're doing with RAIN, and I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about working with men and bringing in men as allies, and different ways you're able to do that, because again, that's something here in the school, in the Elliott School. We're trying to reach more men in the school to take the gender classes, and it's always challenging. But we are kicking off a speaker series on masculinities and international affairs in April, and we're hoping that is a doorway in for a lot of our male students. But just interested to hear more about how you're engaging with men as allies in particular. And then Layla, I suppose this is a question I'm really interested in, because I'm a new director here in the school, so I'm very much building at the moment myself, and I'm very inspired about what you have done with GAO. And really elevating your work on women's rights issues, and the fact that you say you've 200 members now. So interested to know a bit more about that process.
Sure.
And how you were able to share the work that you were doing more broadly and bring in those members, and what are the ongoing sustainability steps around that piece as well.
Sure. Okay, well, I guess I'll start. Okay, so one of the first, I'll answer the kind of tips part, and then I'll do a fundraising part, which will lead nicely into Andrea. So one of the first things that my co-author, I feel like I could write a book about how this book is getting made, but one of the first things my co-author asked me when we first had a conversation, she was basically like, so what would you tell someone who wants to run for office? And I would say 5 things. One, I would say, figure out a problem you want to solve. And this is a true fact. Women often run for office because they want to solve a problem in their community. They see something they want to fix. Men, on the other hand, see how I'm solving problems right now? Men, on the other hand, often, not all men, but they often run for office to either elevate their professional and political careers, or they want to be someone. So first step, I would say, is identifying what that problem is. Second step is start showing up. Right? If you aren't going to your city council meetings, if you aren't going even to book club, start participating, right? Lean in, so to speak. Put your body where your mouth is, because eventually you're going to ask your community to show up for you. So you have to do that for them. Third thing I would say is start talking to people about running for office. Now, I don't mean putting on Twitter, I'm running for office today. I'm saying in your course of conversation, start sharing with people that you're interested in running. You can't keep this as a secret, and no one runs for office by themselves. The other thing I would say, the fourth step, is then when you tell people, get their contact information, get a business card, start keeping track of the people you're talking to. Take a mental note of their reaction when you say, hey, I'm thinking about running for office. Because what you'll do is eventually when you do run, you look back at that list of people, you have a base of supporters.
And you ask for money.
Well, also that. You have people you can ask for money. I mean, you build a list, right? And then the fifth thing I would say is just go for it, right? Don't let you know, the next training, the next book to read, the next year go by without running. You know, men are not waiting. Men don't wait. And I feel like as women, if you're passionate about doing something today, do it today. So those are like my 5 basic tips. And the book kind of follows that same outline in a lot of ways, but we also address topics like what to wear and the inherent sexism that's in that conversation. We talk about how running for office can really be a part of your real life. And part of that is looking at, you know, as a new mom, the care I'm providing, and also looking at the care I need. We talk about the salary that some offices pay or don't pay, right? Because we all need to be financially secure, and not all offices pay the same amount. So those are some of the topics that we cover in the book. Now, when it comes to fundraising, obviously money is a huge barrier that keeps women back. It's one of the reasons Emily's List was started, right? Women candidates weren't seen as viable, and so we needed to raise money early enough so that the political prognosticators and donors and the press would see women as viable because they had raised all this early money. You know, they had the kind of the seed money ready to go. So a couple of things about raising money. First off, I think it's about changing the frame. It's not so much, I mean, people can get really icky about asking for money. You know, you're kind of putting out your hand like, can I have some money? It's really about sitting up, putting your shoulders back, and not asking so much money for you. You're asking for an investment in your vision. You're asking for someone to contribute to an opportunity for them, right? So once you kind of, I would say, flip the script on fundraising, it becomes a different equation, right? You're giving them something as opposed to them giving you something.
You're offering them opportunity to participate.
Exactly. Another pro tip that I would just have on fundraising, and see what you think about this one, you know, when you make that hard ask, and you do make a hard ask, right? You need to be specific. If you ask for a specific amount, more than likely that tells the donor, 1, she knows what she wants. 2, it's a starting point. If you just say, can you give me a contribution? Someone could just say no, and that's the end of the conversation. But if you ask for $250, they say, well, I can't do that. You can say, well, how about 100, right? It keeps the dialogue going. But once you make that ask, stay silent. Stay silent. Do not feel the need to apologize, to fill the space with judgments or qualifications or anything. You've asked for money, let them respond to you. This is also true if you're asking for a raise, a promotion, or anything like that. I do a trick. I'll have, especially if it's via phone, I'll have a pencil and I'll just bite it so that I don't fill the space, because I will fill the space. But those are a few tricks and tips for when it comes to fundraising. It's really about, you know, putting yourself in a chair where you feel confident and that you can ask for money. But like Andrea said, it's more about offering an opportunity than anything else. So there you go. You're welcome.
And this is why I would put Kate in front of any donor.
Sure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And interesting, certainly on the when you are talking to folks, offering them this opportunity to invest, to participate, to be a part of a candidate, a movement, a thought, a change, there isn't a reason to apologize, because you are giving them this opportunity, and you're not selling them a bag of tricks, right? And I think that that's something that you'll see across the board, certainly from the alumni that I have always engaged with from this program, is integrity and a passion and a belief in the greater good. And I mean, this is envisioning change, right? It means we're all working towards this change, and we all know we need each other. So the things we're asking of each other are real, they're tangible, they're valuable. And there isn't any way around it. You ask for what you need, and you ask everybody to come along with you and come together. You asked me a different question though, and I took some law classes, but I'm not a lawyer, but I'm still gonna do a non-answer, only because. Only because your question about men participating in the Me Too movement is A, very complex, and B, I don't want to come into it from either a RAIN perspective or even a movement perspective. I will tell you from a fundraising lens, a development lens, when it comes to sexual violence or anything that that affects our society, it is my way is I don't discriminate in who I ask for money from and why. I'm not going to only ask women for money as if it's a women's issue, a women's problem, and then we have to fix it. I'm going to ask just as many men to participate by contributing. And I'm going to talk about it. I mean, I think that's one of the things too, is you're in the room and you're in the space and you have an opportunity to say, this is what we do as RAIN. These are what our coalition and colleagues do in other spaces. Let me have this conversation with you, no matter who you are, and give you the opportunity, as a man, as a woman, doesn't matter, to participate in this conversation. So that's my approach from the funder perspective. Your question about having men involved is just a very complex one, and there's going to be a lot of ways around it, and a lot of ways to approach it. We have a long way to go. But I do know also that as a RAIN, as a direct service organization, and then many of the local sexual assault service providers do not only treat women. We know that, we know the numbers, and so that is also a reason to continue to encourage engagement of everybody in the conversation.
Thank you.
So the community of practice on women's and gender policy issues at GAO. So I basically started working on that right out of the gate almost 3 years ago. When I left my last job, my boss said to me, well, you'll work on gender in your next job. And I was like, I'm not sure if there's, a gender team. I'm like, I don't know if that exists there. And she was like, oh, well, if there isn't one, you'll start it. So that's what I did. So I got there. I knew about GAO from their gender pay gap work, women on corporate boards, women in management. I knew they had this body of work. So I started talking to leadership and different people. Leadership Connect, they encouraged me. They have a very strong diversity and inclusion space, and they prioritize it at GAO. So I had the space to sort of work on this. But one of my managers put me in touch with other people who cared about the issue, and we worked together to establish this group. GAO already has the infrastructure for communities of practice. It's about 3,000 member mid-size agency. And because we do so much research and program evaluation, it's kind of think tanky. A lot of people are interested in different areas. So they had the infrastructure for communities of practice already. What I did do is I thought about the reason why. Like, why do we need this space? Why do we need this group? And basically, it's because we have all this technical expertise. We have all this gender work, and we should identify it as a body of work and talk about that work. And people across the agency are interested, and then our clients, members of Congress, are requesting this work. So they're interested in this work. So I also cataloged. I looked online for all the gender work that GAO had published, and I put together a compendium, and I found 55 reports. I organized it by topic area, organized it by mission teams, and I found that GAO had published across the mission teams. There are like around 10 mission teams, and it wasn't all coming out of education, workforce, and income security, which is what you might expect. It's also coming out of their defense capabilities management, because they had done all this work on sexual assault in the military. Actually, GAO has contributed tremendously to sexual assault in the military, and contributed research that wasn't there before. They made lots of recommendations to DOD, Department of Defense, on this. So it's really, so it's not just the groups that you would think about. It's also financial management and community investment. It's also healthcare. It's also the international affairs and trade. It's female genital mutilation. It's diversity in the financial sector. breast cancer education. I mean, we have grown that compendium now to 115 reports. So just to recognize those 115 reports as gender or women's policy issues reports, I think is important. And then I also created a vision document. Like, this is why we need this group. These are the things that we can do. And it's not advocating for a policy or anything like that. It's basically just recognizing it and getting a community together, getting colleagues throughout the agency together, because they're interested in these issues. They want to have events that are focused on these issues. They want to hear about the gender policy work. For example, we just had an event on gender-based pricing, the pink tax. So their GAO has a report on gender-based pricing now. So we just had an event where the economist talked about it, the director talked about it. We talked about our clients who requested it. And that's the kind of information we share. It's not, it's not advocacy. It's more of a, this is the work that GA is doing around gender.
It sounds like you did a lot of convening, and it sounds like you do a lot of sharing of tactics, and I think that that's something that's a really a powerful and sometimes can be when we think about gender and what that yields. I think that there is that sharing and that convening that lift everybody up, and that I think is powerful ultimately.
Yeah, I will add to that and say that to get it established, I think I've just organized and facilitated and documented dozens of meetings across the agency with multiple different stakeholders. But now there's this small group, a steering committee, and it's so wonderful to share this space with it's all women right now, but they really care about these issues too. So it's nice to have that, and it's not my thing anymore. It belongs to all these people.
One of the cool things that I've gotten to do at the FCC that, I think sometimes we think of government as kind of stuck in the mud and hard to change and hard to make change. And I think your example is a great one. My example is a little, I don't know, I felt like I just kind of did it. But basically, coming and working for the only female commissioner at the FCC, one of the things that we wanted to do was really uplift the women in the technology, innovation, and media sectors. And we kind of brainstormed, how are we going to do this? Do we want a conversation series? Do we want to have meetings? And we decided to do a podcast. And probably about 6 months ago, I started kind of reaching out to individual people at the FCC, the audio visual guy. Hey, can we record in the studio? Hey, can we do this? And all of a sudden, we had broadband conversations. And it's this podcast where my boss talks to only women guests, and we talk to them about what they're working on, what they think the future holds. And it's this really rad thing that just happens to be taking place at the FCC. And it's an exciting thing that's always kind of morphing and changing, but it's also one that, I get to learn a ton of new skills. Never produced a podcast before, but let's try this on. But also one that I get to interact with some really cool women that and hear their stories and watch my boss really kind of embrace and uplift at the same time. It's a really exciting thing to be a part of.
What's it called, the podcast?
Broadband Conversations.
Great.
So you really gotta like that pun. Yeah. You can find it on iTunes. I'm promoting the shit out of it.
Yeah, you are. I had one other thing that this reminded me of, which was just kind of how we take the things that we learn and how we bring them with us to each space, and then build something, do something. And so I felt like I was leaving the Beltway. I actually physically left the Beltway, but I was leaving the kind of advocacy, political and policy work that I've been doing to be at a university. But actually, and in reality, my position was actually doing instead of being housed in a college at Penn State, I was across university with student affairs and educational equity, and that was first-generation scholarships. It was our gender equity center. It was our LGBTQA student resource center, our mental health center. It was our career services. It was our residence and leadership. And so ultimately, it really had a lot to do with everything that I came with, but I did find too that having the masters and having the vocabulary and the access to the readings and the thought and the conversation also helped me navigate academia and being there from a development side of things. And I felt like I could, I kind of just moved between lots of spaces. I was in development and academics and the programmatic side of things, and so it was. I learned a lot, which is always important. Always keep your ears and eyes open and observe. But I felt like I could come to the table and I could talk and I could and hopefully put some focus and some light on some of these underfunded programs. So that was exciting as well, and found my own little advocacy in central Pennsylvania. And so I did want to kind of say that as I was exploring that, particularly for my family and some of our choices, that you take everything with you and you cross-pollinate, and it's important in whatever space you're in.
Totally. Yeah.
Any other
Questions?
questions?
Sure. Do we have more questions?
So especially from students who, want to start more at the beginning, like how do you get a job?
Get a job?
Well, there's more questions for you amongst two. Well, actually, thank you for your words. It was impressive. I don't have much contact with politics directly, but I do have a few questions thinking actually about my country, so, but nothing too specific. But as I heard you guys, especially Kate, I was thinking about how could we replicate these ideas of participation of women at politics in other countries. So I'm Brazilian, and I don't have to get in details, but we have a few difficulties to make women to participate, especially with the background with male toxicity and the whole thing. And I wish you guys could talk if you know about something that the way that you've been working here in the United States could help other countries as Brazil or other countries that you might know, or how could we make women to trespass those borders. Politics has been, especially in Brazil, the idea of dirty things, corruption, violence. We have we'll talk about that later.
Yep.
So how do you guys think that we could trespass this, replicate, or which ideas could work for other countries?
Sure. So a couple things to respond. I think when there are few women in government, and I think this past November we got a little bit of a nice boost. We got some reinforcements here in DC and across the country. But when there are few women in government, when women run, they tend to be seen as natural outsiders. Right? They tend to be seen as candidates who will affect change, who will fix the corruption, who will work across the aisle, who will make change, right? And so when women are seen as change agents, that creates an electoral space for them, right? It creates an opportunity and a natural campaign. So that's one area that I would say. The other area is, definitely looking at NDI. I mean, we talked about it a little bit here, but one of the things that I think NDI does so well is,
Do you know what NDI is?
oh, sorry, the National Democratic Institute. Right. So there's the National Democratic Institute, and you should obviously talk more, but they will go into communities and countries and host trainings for not only current political candidates, but also women who might want to be candidates. So women from either the legal profession or teachers or, kind of those natural hotbeds of where candidates seem to kind of matriculate up from. And they both train women in country, but they also bring political experts from the United States to these countries and do kind of like week-long, even sometimes longer training. So that's something that you should definitely look into and you can talk more about, but it's a great resource and a tool. Lastly, I think having research really helps, and I don't know if we've said the word research enough on this panel, but the value of research is so critical when it comes to women's political participation, because it gives you those talking points. So like when I said that women run for office to fix a problem, that comes from a Jennifer Lawless and Richard Fox study at American University. When I say that women tend to work more across the aisle, that comes from academic research as well. And also when I say that women pass more legislation, they introduce more legislation, they work with their colleagues across the aisle, they also bring more federal spending home. All of that is rooted in academic research, and having that body of material to pull on helps you make the case for why women, right? Unfortunately, I think we are continuing, we always will make the case here in this country for why women, even as our numbers increase, but that is something that I would say, if you can identify some of those researchers who are doing that work or who could do that work, that would be a big kind of first step. Yep.
Yeah, just to add to that, so working at the Women's Learning Partnership, they actually had a partner in Brazil, and they have there was a robust civil society group in Brazil that we worked with, because there are so many women working. I mean, you don't have to work as a MP, you don't have to be a member of parliament, but at the grassroots level. So even WLP really focused on grassroots and working on basic leadership skills. You can eventually get to the point where when you're training members of parliament, but I think even the grassroots and the basic leadership skills can go a long way, giving women the confidence to organize, to work together, and a lot of grassroots groups are already doing that. And I know in Brazil, there are a lot of women groups, civil society groups working to make change in their communities. Thinking back to NDI, violence is a huge deterrent to women participating in politics. They have a whole campaign, Not the Cost, where they're trying to get more attention paid to the particular gender-based violence targeting women politicians. Women are silenced through social media. Their characters are attacked. There are vicious attacks on social media. We see that with U.S. candidates running. We see that with candidates and politicians in the UK, and we see that across the world for sure. So I think that is a huge deterrent to women participating because they're fearful. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, so at NDI there are many ways that the organization supports women in politics. They support civil society groups, women's organizations, but not just women's organizations, just civil society organizations across the board that include women that are working towards movements and small projects in their community. And they're making progress towards various ends in communities in 60 countries. And then in terms of the trainings that Kate referenced, they have really robust programs where they Win with Women programs where they have conferences, they bring in women mayors, they have consultants, they have experts who come into country and they train women leadership, public speaking, fundraising. They train these candidates with a range of different levels of sophistication and at different levels to become politicians or leaders in their community. And then just Just elections. One thing that NDI does also is they're trying to get gender integrated more into election observations. You know, they look for violence, gender-based violence targeted at women in their election observations, but then also looking at how women are involved in the election process, the electoral process in general, as part of their reports when they go into country and look at how elections were run. So there are many more examples and many more ways to support women in politics, but it is a challenge. But there's still, so many women are still very active across the world and in their communities in face of the challenges that exist. And I can find the name of that Brazilian organization for you if you. Yeah. Okay.
I think this is a good time for us to say thank you so much for sharing your stories, because they've been incredibly impressive, incredibly inspiring, and really the stories that you have shared are a gift for all of us here. They are ways in which you have performed mentorship in passing on this knowledge and this expertise to this room here, and I hope through the video to the wider community that represents women's gender and sexuality studies. So please join me in thanking our wonderful guests today.
Thank you. Thank you.